Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 25 of the Backyard Banter Podcast. My name is Matt Harmon. If you've been listening to the show, you know what we're doing here is talking to some of the most interesting people in the football world, whether it's fantasy football or draft Twitter or just covering the league in general. We're talking to some of the best people in order to give people a framework of how to, get a job in this industry or just listen to some interesting stories. And I think we have a great person to do that on today, someone that could definitely offer the perspective of somebody that's coming up through the industry, and that's my man Graham Barfield. He's a writer for Roto World, Fantasy Labs, and Dynasty League football contributor. He also hosts a Fantasy Game Theory podcast, which we were talking about before this. I think is broadcast out of a bunker in Saudi Arabia, but it's a good listen, so make sure you're tuning in. Graham, how the hell are you doing today?
I'm great, Matt. Thank you so much for having me on the show. Yes, we can blame the bunker on Jake. I'm actually in America, in Jacksonville, Florida. He's the one out in the Middle East in the desert sands. So you can blame him.
Yeah, that sounds good. It's always good. I wish I had a co-host to blame on the problems for the show, but if something goes wrong here, it's me. It must be me. But yeah,
you can blame me, Matt. It's okay.
Well, for sure. I mean, I'll normally throw the guest under the bus and then they'll never get invited again. And so Graham, this is funny that you're on the 25th episode, because 25 is actually my favorite number. So this is a pretty big honor for you. I hope that you realize what a big deal this is.
Wow. It's a lot of pressure, man. Are you 25?
No, I'll be 25 in August.
There we go. I knew I was close. Why is 25 your favorite number?
I don't know. It just is appealing because it's like a quarter, and I always feel like quarters are like money. Not okay. Anyways, yeah, like money. Like 25 cents was most important of all the change. The rest of it's like, what does that even matter? But quarters was like, I talked to, obviously, if you've been following me recently, you know that I'm talking about being fat as a kid, and I loved quarters. Like we put it in the soda machine, put it in the vending machine. You get those little stupid prizes outside, like in claw machines. I used to play those all the time as a kid. So quarters were important.
Well, I'm glad that you bestowed your most favorite number on me. It's a great honor to be on the show. There's been a lot of great guests on the show, so I'm just happy to be a small part of the show here.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And yeah, if you saw the status update that went on the into your podcast feed yesterday, Monday morning, and that this is like season 1 of the show. So we're kind of at the quarter way point of 100 episodes, which hopefully someday we'll get to. But I hope everybody's cool with that. There hasn't been a widespread panic that the show will end at some point in before the preseason. But I think that Graham is a good representation of what we're talking about on this show. So Graham, but to get started, let's talk about your origin story. How did you come to kind of fall in love with football or fantasy sports? Take us back into that portion of your history.
Sure. So I think like everyone else's answer on this show, you have to be like a bona fide dork when you're young. So like I remember I used to keep these like elaborate notebooks when I was like 4 or 5 years old, and I would just literally draw hundreds of football fields and have like little guys playing on them and stuff. And I think that's kind of where I got my like creativity aspect from. Like my dad and my grandfather both played football. I didn't. I played baseball. So I kind of always grew up in like a sports home. I always had like Madden playing as a kid. I always was like, I think Roto Patrick Doherty noted that he was always reading the newspaper, and like when I listened to the episode, I'm like, that was like literally me. I would go through and read football box scores and go see how many touchdowns Randy Moss scored when he was playing with the Vikings and stuff like that. And I always had an interest, I guess, tracking the game from a statistical standpoint as a kid. And I think it just kind of always, that love of sports and football is just kind of always there for me. I think it's a pretty popular story on your show, but it is interesting that we all kind of have that. If we all have one thing in common, it's that most of us kind of grow up with it in our blood, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's almost something that's like this was going to happen. You were going to eventually have to do something more with that. And kind of in that vein, when did you first get kind of the itch to write about football or kind of take it the next step past the obsessive fandom?
Sure. So like I started playing fantasy sports probably like 6th grade, I want to say. And I always kind of played through middle school and high school, but by the end of my senior year in high school, I was working this job in accounting at a flight school here in Jacksonville. And I did a little bit of everything, and it got to the point my freshman year of college where I was just no longer happy, and I kind of wanted to like just chase this dream of writing about football. And I always I did not have like you. I don't have a writing background at all. Like, if I'm a finance major in college, I'm about to finish my degree in August, and I kind of just wanted to just go for it. So I quit my accounting job. I'd worked there for about 3 years. Was just pretty much unhappy, and decided I wanted to start writing about football. So I applied for this one job, and we won't have to get into to who it was or where it was, but I actually got denied for the writing contest or whatever they had going on. And that kind of hurt a little bit to get your foot slammed on right when you get in through the door, you think. So I started writing on my own blog. I came up with my own blog, and I worked on that for like 5 or 6 months during the summer, I want to say. And then sent some work to JJ Zacharyson over at Number Fire, who you previously had on the show. And he graciously, brought me on. And this all happened like 2 years ago. So I guess I've always had the itch, just like everybody else. I've always had the itch, but just one day it kind of hit me that this is something that I really wanted to chase and I really wanted to do, and just see how far I could take it.
Yeah, man, I hear you. Yeah, you and I kind of came up around the same time, like 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago for me a little bit. So we've kind of been able to see each other's career path grow and go different places and this, that, and the other. And you've definitely done a lot of great stuff. So you started out, some place turned you down, and I think we've all been there. I've been turned down a few places before too, we don't need to get into, of course, like you said, but what is that like, kind of, because it's a tough thing. People think, well, I'm going to just write about football. It's not always easy to just jump into space. What was kind of that first little bit of disappointment like? Did it make you want to work harder, or get into that a little bit?
Sure. So, looking back on it, that article that I sent to this site was not good. To the point, that's kind of the key point there. I was just starting out. So there's that caveat, but sure. Yeah, of course it made me work harder. It made me want to strive for more, because I knew this is something that I wanted to do. And just because one place said no, doesn't mean all other places are going to say no in 6 months. Once I, get a little more work under my belt and kind of start defining my voice. As writers, I'm constantly trying to improve. Especially, I feel like I have to do it because I don't come from a writing background. There's so many great writers like yourself. I know I have to include. I know I have to compliment Matt on the show. So there goes my quota there. But no, it's one of those things where I feel like I had to constantly improve and get better, and I still do. But it definitely made me want to work harder, for sure.
Yeah, right. I felt the same way. Graham, I guess you mentioned, not coming from a writing background, and always improving. Also, let me circle back here a little bit. How old exactly are you? Since I said I'll be 25 in August. How old are you again?
Yeah, I'm 21.
Right on. Yeah. So you're this is great, because I think you're the only person. Have I had anybody that's younger than me? No, Adam Pfeiffer was the other one that I think I've had on that's younger than me. I don't remember anybody else, but this is great, because normally I'm the youngest one in the room. So I feel so old now. The ripe old age of 24.
Right.
Yeah, no, for sure. But so you're about to graduate college. So, you're kind of in that point. And it wasn't, I didn't even realize that this was what I wanted to do until after that. So yeah, for sure. It's pretty cool. But you mentioned not coming from a writing background and coming from a finance background. Do you think that influences your perspective at all when you in your football work?
I think it does. I think we all kind of take what we know and just extrapolate it when we're writing. I obviously come from a numbers background, in the sense that it's what I have to do in college. I've never had a job really per se in finance. I had that accounting job I talked about, but it wasn't anything crazy. I wasn't the controller of a company or anything. But yeah, I think it definitely does come out. I think certain people have certain skills that they do very well. And one thing that I feel like I'm pretty good at is the analysis, like the numbers standpoint. And something that I need to personally like get better at is writing. So sure, yeah, I definitely think that has influenced me, and it's helped me kind of somehow get to where I'm at today, where I'm on your show. I have no idea how I'm here, but it got me here.
Well, you mentioned complimenting me, and you did. I think you did that enough off the show that I was like, all right, we need to bring him onto the podcast so that I can get some more of an ego boost from Graham. From the younger generation, because it's important. No, I bet seriously. I mean, you do good work, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But kind of continuing on through your story here. So you mentioned you hooked up with Number Fire, but you're obviously at a couple of other different places now. Talk us through how you went from different places, how your kind of your brand, as we always talk about, expanded a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good question. I've never really thought about that. So I don't know. One day it's just, I guess, JJ was a huge help for me, like personally, just becoming a better writer, first and foremost, but also understanding how to present complex data in very, very concise ways. Like I used to have a tendency, I still do, to just keep writing and just like try to throw words out there. So I guess having JJ in my corner helped. But one day, I think Evan Silva followed me on Twitter maybe a year and a half ago or something like that. And for whatever reason, he really liked what I had to say, and was a huge help. If I'd tweet out a cool stat or something like that, he'd retweet it or something like that. So I think just constantly grinding out what you think is thoughtful and statistical analysis, whatever it is, if you're good at doing like more statistics-based stuff like I am, or if you're good at just watching film and coming up with cool stuff. So I think defining what your hashtag brand is, like you like to say, is important in the sense that you need to know what you want to do.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the reasons that I wanted to bring you on the show, also we've talked about, I like you. That's important. I don't think I've had anybody on the show that I objectively don't like. Maybe at some point I will. But I think that one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the podcast was that we talk a lot about certain things on here, about how to kind of come up in the industry and, do things the right way or whatever, or what's the best path in order to kind of get to reach that aspiration of being a full-time writer, or just having some sort of space here in the industry. And, one of the things is, of course, don't be an asshole. We've talked about that a lot. And I think that you're not an asshole, at least on Twitter. Again, we've talked about maybe that's not so much the case for either of us off the air, but the other thing is coming up with unique content. And, you and I have gone back and forth behind the scenes for probably a few months now, or maybe even going back longer than that, kind of talking about what's going to be your thing. Like mine is obviously reception perception. What's going to be your piece of unique content? And you have kind of started to debut something, Yards Created. I want you to talk a little bit about that and kind of take us through. Let's start at the beginning. What was the impetus? What was the idea there?
Yeah. So I guess the very beginning was, I remember like 2 years ago, Bishop Sankey, it just came out, and he was like this, like no one really had a consensus on him. Like he had super good agility numbers. And I know we're not supposed to talk about football on your show, so just give me 30 seconds.
No, it's okay. I think for you to talk about your idea, like we're gonna have to grit our teeth and talk about some damn football for once.
I know, it's awful. So anyway, I remember reading about Bishop Sankey like 2 years ago, and there's a couple profiles out there, and I don't remember who wrote them, but it doesn't really matter. Anyway, people really liked some of his agility numbers, and they thought his film wasn't so great. But then I was thinking to myself, just kind of in the back of my head, like there's nobody's really quantifying if he's good or not. Nobody's really coming out with objective data that says, okay, this is what he does well, this is what he doesn't do well. So fast forward to kind of like with that in the back of my mind of like, how can we better advance the conversation? Reception perception comes out. And, I'm not kidding you. I've probably read everything that you have written with that. And I think it's incredibly, incredibly powerful data that you're working with and that you're coming up with. So I remember in March of this year, I just sent you a message and I was like, hey Matt, so if you wanted to like chart running backs, give me some things that you would want to know. And I remember you answered with a couple data points, and I kind of built off of that. And yeah, so it started super organically where I just wanted to kind of advance the conversation. And then honestly, I did not think it would be, of course, this is incredibly like a small term thing, but I did not think it would be as, it would go over as well. Like I thought some people would just read it and be like, hey, what the hell is this guy talking about? Like, why is he even attempting to do this? So in all seriousness, yeah, it just kind of started in this kind of weird organic way where just something manifested in the back of my mind. And I got to a point where I felt like I could attack it.
Yeah, for sure. And, kind of on my end from talking to you about it, I was excited to hear. And you're not the first, you're not the first or only person that's ever approached me about like, how can I do reception perception for this other position? Like a sort of that sort of thing. And, I always encourage people, you're the first one that's actually debuted it. So that's encouraging. I've given kind of the same, not the same exact advice, but there's been other people that have approached me about it, and you're the first one to put it out there. So that's good. It's good to be first. It's good to get out there quickly, but also with quality work. And I think that, the reason that I encouraged you to do it and other people too, was that I knew that there was a demand for, especially running backs. When you approached me about running backs, I was like, yeah, that's something that people ask me all the time. Like, other than, are you going to do reception perception for tight ends? Which is like, I get that makes a little sense, but for God's sakes, there's enough wide receivers that I'm never going to ever get to because I'm one person. But yeah, running backs, people demand that piece of information. So I think it was smart of you to get in on something that, running backs are even harder to understand than receivers, I think sometimes. So I think that was smart of you to choose that position.
Well, thank you. And yeah, I got to know what Gronkowski's reception perception score is, man. I mean, come on.
Oh God. Listen, and I get that people want to know, and it makes sense from like, hey, they catch passes and they run routes, but just the way the positions are used and the type of coverages they face would be completely different, and it would be hard. And also, like, because I think I freelanced for the Washington Post a little bit, and the first thing that they asked me to do this offseason was like, hey, can you do one on Jordan Reed? And I had to send them like a long detailed like reason why I wasn't like, why I'm not going to do it. I was like, because I don't even have any like numbers to compare to, it would be the same. I do the same damn thing I did with Cordero Patterson, where I didn't have any numbers to compare him to. And I was like, oh, he's actually bad, but I thought he was good just because I had like one number, like one other study to compare him to. I'm way off track, talking about myself, typical selfish Harmon. But yeah, but it's, running backs are an important position. So what kind of goes into yards created? You've done a few of the prospects. What kind of talk about like your sample size, or even just what you're looking for, what you're charting? Like if somebody's listening to this and they haven't heard of the series, what goes into it?
Yeah, so I take at least for the rookies, I haven't fully decided what I'm going to be doing for the NFL guys yet, but for the rookies that are coming into the league this year, I take their film on draft breakdown, and there's usually, I try to do 5 games. If there's 4 or 3, I kind of have to roll with it and just go with the punches. So what I look for in general is like, I believe running back play is highly dependent on offensive line performance. I think there are numbers of ways beyond what I'm doing to quantify that. But what I wanted to know is what running backs are more dependent and less dependent on their offensive line play, because I think there's a sliding scale there. Not all running backs or not all offensive lines are created equal. So some of the things I'm looking for when I do yards created is how many yards on average does the offensive line block? And I know that's kind of like it can be definitely difficult watching the game itself to kind of define that for sure. It's especially difficult knowing the differences kind of between like man and zone blocking. So that kind of goes into it, and knowing, obviously like Louisiana Tech and Kenneth Dixon's offensive line is going to be totally, totally different than Ohio State's. So those are some of the things that I kind of wanted to advance the conversation on, and really just put data, objective data. Well, it can be, you could argue it's subjective, but put data at least onto paper for some of these guys, and I think it's somewhat working.
Yeah, actually, let's get into a little bit of a conversation about that, because this is obviously something you could make the same argument with my work, that like, yes, it's data And in a way, you can say it's objective, but there's also some subjectivity to it, which is something that personally I embrace. I don't think that everything needs to be objective, nor do I think that everything that is objective that it matters, or that it should matter anything more than something that's subjective. But kind of discuss your feelings on that. Where is there a place for subjective data? What's the boundary there? Like, how do you feel about that topic?
Well, I mean, we're not all robots, so we can't,
Right.
we're not just like, we're humans, right? Like almost everything. I cannot think of many things in life that are not subjective.
Yeah. Preach.
Like it's so frustrating. Like I try super hard on Twitter to not be like a blowhard, like just coming out with these data points that just kind of don't matter. But in any type of analysis, especially football analysis, it's always going to be somewhat subjective. Like, I go on Twitter and come out with an article, or I come up with an opinion or something like that. And that's what it just is. It's my subjective opinion. In my opinion, I believe X, Y, and Z. So sure, I think there's definitely a line to be walked, especially when you're doing something like charting. Because like I said, with Kenneth Dixon, let's take him for example, right? So I knew that the offensive line was going to be horrible, and I didn't want to like force it. You know what I'm saying? But there's kind of this line you have to walk between subjectivity and objectivity, where objectively the offensive line is going to be bad, but subjectively you have to still find a way to put that into data.
Yeah, well, it makes a lot of sense. And from my end, I mean, telling you whether a guy is open or not, whether he was successful on a route, that's subjective. But I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing, or that it should be, discounted, because the point to me, and I'm not going to hijack the show here, but I think that this is definitely a good organic conversation to have. Like, I think that there's some like importance in subjectivity, like you mentioned, and the point of charting all the stuff out is to keep a log of it and keep it consistent. So it's clearly defined, in my mind. I know what is successful and what is not successful on a route. And I also know how that logs into all my data, and I'm seeing things the same way. Cause personally, I've heard a lot of people say that, you could use that, like the NFL is starting to put chips in the players to they can measure, how fast they're going or how far they are away from each other. So some people would say like that you could, objectively measure separation that way. But I also think that that's not necessarily true, because what's open for, Mike Evans is different than what's open for Odell Beckham, because they're built different. And I think that that's the important thing, is that always remember, and this is, I come from a social science background, so I'm always going to default on this, that we're looking at human subjects here. And I think that's an incredibly important point in the objectivity versus subjectivity discussion.
For sure. And we could do a whole show on RFID technology. That would be really, really cool, Matt. But not to get too far off on a tangent. Yeah. The important thing that I try to keep in mind, like even when I'm playing fantasy football, is like, these guys are humans. They're just like us. They make mistakes. Like running backs will misread a blocking scheme. Wide receivers will run the wrong route, and the ball gets intercepted. These guys can make mistakes, and they will make mistakes. And but I think knowing that and being able to put that, not put it, but turn it into like you said, like a data point. I think that's super important, and it's kind of where football analysis is going, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you. And the two main points that I'll kind of wrap up my thoughts on it here are that, one, I would argue with you that everything that you perceive is subjective, that your entire, which is way too meta and like way on the couch. Like everything you're about your reality is subjective. That's just one point. Two, that, hell, I kind of lost my second point, so I'm going to edit this part out. I don't know. I had a second point there. Now I forgot it. Oh. The other point that I would make is that all things are never created equal. And that's the problem when you try to make an objective conclusion about, again, human subjects. Like, you're assuming that all things are created equal, and all things are never, ever created equal. So that would be my two closing points. So Graham, if you want to offer anything else and not lose your train of thought, go ahead.
No, I love that point. Like, all things are never created equal. I've never really I never really thought about it that way. That's a really cool point. And just like in anything in life, man, like growing up, from growing up into like a really nice household to growing up in like an inner city, like we have this country where we think it's all equal and stuff. But that's a really interesting point. That's a good point. I really like that, Matt.
Yeah, you can spin that into a lot of different ways. Like, I mean, even just your and I like your background versus my background, like we're going to perceive things differently because of the way we were, it's that like nature versus nurture sort of thing. I mean, as much, and this is take off one headphone because this might be a bit of a hot take, but I mean, you can understand like why people might vote for one candidate if you think about things from their perspective over the other, just because that's their reality. That's all they perceive. And while we sit in the place that we sit, and we think that it's ridiculous, and we sure as hell might be right considering our election climate now, but like you can understand why people perceive things differently because that's what they know, that's just what they've always been accustomed to. But I have taken this way too far the other direction, I think.
No, I mean, these types of organic conversations is what makes your show different and interesting. And yeah, like you mentioned, the election climate now, it's just, it is definitely an interesting topic to talk about for sure.
Yeah, that's for sure. And we'll save that for the Backyard Banter Politics podcast. We'll segue away from that right now. So, Graham, going forward with yards created, what's kind of your goal with the series? And I know that this can, from personal experience, I know that this can kind of be a tough question to answer.
I have no idea. Like, I'll just be honest with you. I have no idea. Right now, I'm just enjoying watching football and coming up with this process and kind of watching it grow a little bit. I think that the end goal point for me personally would be to see, I just want to make sure that I do this in a way where I can advance the conversation about football. Because if anything, like first and foremost, I'm a fantasy guy. I love fantasy football, but I don't really necessarily consider this work to be so fantasy oriented. So if anything, I'm here just to kind of, I love this stuff, man. I mean, like, this is what this is my dream. This is what I want to do, but I want to see it grow. I think that's the key point. I want to see this grow.
Sure. And I think that's good. So you're only doing it right now at your own site, or have you put it anywhere else?
Yeah, it's just on my little blog. It's my little WordPress blog, which, by the way, is still in the name. I mean, I don't even have my own domain name. I'm not as official or as cool as Mr. Matt Harmon.
Yeah, right. Well, you're not piloting a venture that's losing you money, is what you're saying by being cool, because being invested in the backyardbanter.com is essentially a losing venture because I make $0.0 off the website and I lose a few bucks a year off owning the domain name. So it's not a cool thing, Graham. Stick with the .wordpress, unless you're like me and you're just so vain that you have to have your own domain name.
Yeah, that's funny because, like, I think there's kind of this misconception that, like, just because we're writers, like, we still make money off of this. Like, I can still make money off my site. Like, no, that you don't. Like,
yeah.
Not to get into this, but like, yeah, being a writer is not as glamorous as it's. Like, I can't even tell you how many hours I've worked for free in this industry, and I still do it, like, because I love it. Like, even if I didn't, like, make money, because I have gotten to a point where I can make money doing it. But even if I didn't, I would still be doing this, like I would still be working for free or coming up with like cool things to say. Like, I would still do it.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, we say this, I think I've said this on the show several times or at other places, like the fact that people are listening or reading is like gravy, because this is essentially like, this is a natural instinct. It's what I would be doing even if nobody was listening or reading or anything like that. And you're right, there is not, I can't tell you like how many people I thought were actually like full-time, fully fledged, like making money writers when I first got on football Twitter and like started out. And then slowly but surely you realize, actually a lot of these people are either working for free, they're not making any money off it, or they're making very little money. I mean, it is something, it's something worth talking about on this podcast because that's the target audience. But yeah, it's a lot more closed off than you might necessarily think, just in terms of.
Absolutely. Money. I mean, I for my first little while in the industry, obviously I worked for free, and I had this, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I had the same, I guess, misconception when I first entered it, is that a lot of people do this full time. And then as you go along, you realize like literally maybe 1% to 2% of fantasy writers go on to do it full time. And there's reasons for that. Obviously, this is a very niche community, but it's also a very diverse community where you can have a lot of people talking about the same things. So, not to get too far off onto a tangent here, but
no, you can take the damn tangent any way you want to go. That's the point of the show.
No, that was my final point there. It's funny to me. Like, I still kind of get this. I guess I don't really have a great word to describe it, but kind of this kind of pushback, like, hey, you're a writer, man. You should be making all this money. It's like, no, it's not that at all. It is completely the most unglamorous job ever. It's me sitting here with no shirt on and charting running backs. I mean, how is that glamorous at all? I mean, nobody wants to see that. Come on.
Yeah. Oh, well, I'm sure there's somebody out there that would, but no, it's true. And, it's something that if you're going to do this, I think you really do have, you have to love it. Like it has to be like that natural instinct. Like if it's something that you have to be like, and there are times that certainly I'm like, oh man, I don't want to chart anymore Devin Funchess, but there are also plenty more times where I'm, that much more excited to do the next bit of work. And I'm sure you feel the same way. And I think you have to have that sort of drive, because even when you're at a position where you're full time, it's never going to, you're never going to do work in this industry because of the money. It has to be for many other reasons, but you mentioned it's kind of a niche community. And I would say that the supply of good writers will always outweigh the demand for good writers out there, or just good analysts in general. But I think the way, and I've said this time and time again on the show and several other places, that the way to do it is to stand out. And I think you're a very good example of that right now. That's somebody that's at the very beginning of discovering that thing that's going to help you stand out.
Well, yeah, I really appreciate that, Matt. It means a lot, especially coming from you. But to that point, I think like what you said about there being a huge supply of writers right now, and this has been kind of a key thing on your show, where you mentioned, you got to do something different. You've got to be different. I think if I learned anything going through this whole process in life, the one thing that's, no matter what industry you're in, the one thing that's always going to set you apart is if you can come up with something unique and work your ass off doing it. If you can come up with those two things and really drive yourself, it doesn't matter if you're in banking or if you're in the finance world or whatever you're doing. If you're in the fantasy football community too, if you can find that one thing that's unique and kind of sets you apart and makes you different, and you can do it really, really well, just work your ass off and keep doing it.
Yeah, it's really about asking yourself when you're starting out, what can they come to you to get that they can't get anywhere else? What can they get from Matt Harmon, from Graham Barfield, from listener A, B, or C that wants to do this? What can they get from you that they can't get from anywhere else? And it might not be necessarily like an in-depth statistical model that quantifies film or anything like that. There's plenty of, there's plenty of other things to do, and I don't always have the answer for what that is, but it's on you to find it, I think. And like I said, Graham has found something. And selfishly, let me ask you, Graham. So CJ ProSize, he's good, right? I'm not gonna look.
Oh, he's V good.
Okay. I'm not gonna look because I'm ready to disrobe and walk into the waters on that take. And I just want to make sure that I'm not. I don't know why I had to disrobe, but I did. I'm ready to fully embrace that one. So I just want to make sure I'm not stepping on a landmine here. So there it is.
Oh no, I mentioned this on another show, but when he got drafted by Seattle, I was sitting on my sofa and I fist pumped. I was that excited for him to go to Seattle. It's just, we'll save this for another show, Matt, but he's a very, very good running back, very unique player. I'm very excited for him in Seattle.
Perfect. Yeah, me too. Okay, good. All right, no more football talk. That's good stuff. I just had to get that in as a selfish endeavor there. Again, that's like the third time I've been selfish on the show, so this is not good. I hope my mother's not listening. She's not. But Graham, kind of circling back to you, we mentioned what's your goal with yards created. Is football something that you want to do full time? Is this something that it's kind of that's your goal?
Of course. Anytime I ask myself, I'm graduating in 4 months, right? And any college student that has been ages 21 to 25, whenever you graduate, has this kind of period, this kind of grace period, the 6 months period where you're about to graduate. and you just kind of ask yourself, all right, what am I going to do? What do I want to do when I first get out? And anytime I think about that, I want to do full-time football. I know in the back of my mind, like, of course, we just talked about it. I mean, there's a huge supply of great writers and great analysis out there, and it's really hard to kind of push through in the industry and make it full time. So of course that's the goal there, for sure.
Nice. And I think that everybody is, college. I mean, geez, I remember being there like 3 years ago or whatever. But yeah, it's tough to realize that, because you have to kind of pursue the real life career and football at the same time. And that can be a struggle. What's kind of, so you have a few gigs kind of lined up. I got Roto World, at Fantasy Labs, at all that sort of stuff. What do you think is going to be your next step in that sort of pursuit?
I'll answer the same question. I have no idea. I mean, like it's so funny that the community has, if anything, in the last 2 years, I've seen the community grow in ways that I'm not even sure, like in my very small size of being in this community, I've seen it grow and blossom into something that's almost completely different from where I first walked into it. So if anything, right now I'm excited that I got in 2 years ago and I'm not trying to get in right now. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, like, there's been so many great people that have helped me through this industry. Maybe one end goal, I guess, for myself would be to help other writers get to the point where they can have some sort of, launching pad to start their careers. I think that's something maybe down the line for me, but I have no idea, man. I have no idea. And I think that's cool. That's kind of a cool organic thing, is to not know what you're going to do.
Yeah, I know. That is very powerful. The unknown is a very powerful thing. And it's a good space to be navigating in, though. I think you have, like you said, you have a good base of where you're at. And it is much harder to break in now than it was probably 2 years ago, and even harder, like far more difficult than it was like 5 years ago. I had Evan Silva on the show, and he was talking about these, like, there just weren't this many people doing fantasy football. The league wasn't covered like this 5 years ago. And it's only getting more packed with great people. You mentioned some of the people that have helped you along the line. And I think that the community is a very supportive space, but I've been asking people on the show lately, Graham, like, what's something you see out there that you don't necessarily like? If you'd like to spin positive too, you can talk about something, whether it's the support or anything that you do like, but I want you to tell me what's something out there that you see that you don't necessarily like in the community.
Listening to your show, I knew you were going to ask this, so I've been thinking about it, and the more I've thought about it, it's so when you get something right, whatever it is, like a call, you nailed Allen Robinson last year, right? I mean,
I don't know who that is.
That was huge, but I think we can take this to the flip side and say that it's okay to be wrong. I think on Twitter, we've gotten better as a community at accepting when people are wrong, but just realizing that this is a human game played by humans, that we're going to be wrong 40% of the time for whatever reason. But I think just knowing, like, and not bashing people when they're wrong is important. And also, like, this kind of goes into the being wrong thing, but like, it's okay to have your opinion change or have someone else have a different opinion than you. There's no reason to get like angry or feisty. Like, if anything, on Twitter, like, I wish I could have more player debates, because it's just people get so quick to anger about certain players, and it's kind of frustrating from a standpoint, like, we could have great back and forth about players we have different opinions on, but and it could be a really, really cool kind of like back and forth for people to see and foster debate. But it's so quick to, like, okay, I've got to be right, so I've got to prove to myself, I've got to prove to this other person that I'm going to be right, when in reality, like, 40% of the time, I'm going to be dead wrong. Yeah. And just being able to accept that, I think, is something I'd like to see in the community. And it's hard to admit. It's hard to admit that you're wrong.
It is. And I mean, I'll tell you, like, I've almost completely sworn off player debates on Twitter that I already know going into it is going to go, I think this. Well, other person thinks this. And, like, neither one of us is going to, gonna go anywhere with that stance.
Yeah.
Like I can tell within like 2 tweets how that interaction is gonna go. And at that point I'm just like, I'll just spit back with like, yeah, I guess we'll see, you know, or yeah, it'll be a fun one to see play out. So like, I mean, and which sucks because debating and discussing these things is how we're, you know, supposed to grow. I also think, and you can tell me whether you disagree or not, I think Twitter just inherently lends itself to those kind of debates because it's 140 characters at a time. Like Graham, if you and I disagreed on a player, I think that we could, well, we're sensible human beings, so we might not be good examples, but, you know, even if somebody that you think is like kind of a jackass on Twitter, like you could probably have a good debate on a podcast or even, you know, even in person would be even better, but Twitter just might not be the format for it in some ways.
Yeah, Twitter is not the best medium to have debates, but like I think I could argue this on the flip side too, man. Is like, you know, the 140 character thing could be a good thing. Like you have to get your idea out in a concise manner. So I guess if anything, it kind of lends itself to not being great, but I also see some positive aspects that like, you know, on podcasts, like we could have a 5-minute back and forth and then halfway through it, I forget what I'm talking about, you know? So on Twitter, you're forced to kind of be concise, and that is a positive, but I guess not being so quick to anger and being open-minded to other people's opinions is the one thing I would change.
Yeah. And I would just kind of underscore with that with like, don't take this shit so seriously. Like, I promise it's not a big deal if you were wrong about Laquan Treadwell, or I was right, or I was wrong and you were right. We'll all be here in 2 or 3 years, you know, God willing, and we'll be wrong about something else, or we'll be right about something else. Like this thing, I'm sure like perception will be a disaster in 2016 after being very successful in 2015, because that's just the way this thing goes, man. I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah, it's the law of averages. But to that point, like yeah, it's okay. It's okay to be wrong. And I think in general, like you mentioned Cordarrelle Patterson in the beginning of your whole kind of journey here. But if you can look back on something and say, you know what, at the time, at this specific time, I had all the data in front of me and I came to this conclusion, and you keep that consistent process, I think that's okay. As long as your process and the analysis portion was okay, we're going to be wrong, man. I mean, like, there's nobody's out there keeping score. Like, nobody's sitting under their table in their mom's basement going, oh, Matt Harmon got this one wrong and Graham got this one wrong. Like, nobody's doing that. Like, it's okay to put your opinion out there, and it's okay to be wrong.
Yeah. Well, I would say nobody important is doing that. Like nobody that will actually matter in like your career decision making is doing that, or anybody that, you know, but hell, there might, you know, you never know. There might be somebody.
I mean, I'm sure there's internet trolls that kind of keep tally of it, but that's another conversation. But like you said, yeah, nobody, I guess, important or to somebody that could give you a job is. Yeah,
right. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Everybody's important, but I mean, like, yeah, to somebody that's going to affect your career path, I don't think is like doing the Steve Buscemi and Billy Madison, like with the hit list or whatever.
Yeah, nobody's putting names on a whiteboard and going just checking off tallies. I don't.
While they put lipstick on themselves. Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Oh man, yeah, that's good stuff, Graham. And yeah, it's all good. I wish that debates could be a little bit different on Twitter, but you know, it is what it is. I think we're making progress regardless. Graham, kind of winding down here, and I just have a few more questions to throw your way, of course, that tend to ask everybody here at the end of the show. And I really, really want to thank you for your time today. This has been great. I guess one thing I always like have been asking people is, if you had to, and as somebody I think that kind of is that like aspiring person right now, if you had to give like one piece of advice, something that we haven't already said, to aspiring writers, what would be something that you would say?
I would say, if anything else in your life or any career path that you take, just do it with ambition. Like, just no matter what you do, if you're going to go for something, there's no reason, you know, to half-ass it or just put 50% of your effort into it. If it's something that you truly, truly love, just you've got to stay up until 1 a.m. doing it, you know, like you've got to have that ambition. If you hustle the way I kind of think of it in my head, if I hustle and I work hard enough, to that point, like I think you can achieve whatever it is. It doesn't have to be fantasy football. Like, you know, this is in reality, like fantasy football is pretty much meaningless. It's just kind of this hobby that we've all inherited. But just like anything in life, any goal that you have, if you really, really put your mind and put your money where your mouth is, I think you can achieve great things.
Yeah, I agree with that. And this is a question that I don't get to ask very many people, because they're all old. They're not, you know, young like us. But there's, you know, I'm just kidding. There are sacrifices that you know, older people have to make as well, especially people with families. Like, I don't even know how that happens. But Graham, do you think there's any sacrifices that you've had to make in your pursuit? Because I know that, you know, being in my situation, there was there any moment that you feel like you kind of had to give something up that you necessarily didn't like that you did in order to chase this dream?
Yeah. So like, I guess recently it's been more of like just working Fridays and Saturday nights just to get stuff done. Because in college, like, it's kind of like you never really have a set schedule. But yeah,
not to interrupt, but that's a whole nother perspective that I can't touch on, because I didn't start like pursuing this until after college. But working as a college student, I imagine, has to be a huge pain in the ass.
Oh yeah, I mean, it is. And like, not to get off too big of a tangent or anything, but professors generally don't care about you. Like, they really don't. Like, they just kind of have this you got to get this done, I'm going to be unbending for you kind of mentality. And you have this set schedule where you have to be in class at a certain time. So yeah, for sure, it gets in the way. And I think if anything over the last 2 years, I have like learned that you've got to be able to take time away from, like in college, like I mentioned, you have this set schedule, but you've got to prioritize, I guess, what is important to you and what's not. So I think I've skipped more classes, let's say, in the last 2 years than I would have earlier anticipated, I guess, as a freshman. I guess that's the way I would put it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, I honestly cannot imagine doing like schoolwork and football work at the same time, because for me, it fires off like the same part of the brain, and I just imagine it would be incredibly frustrating, like time wise. I mean, do you even have a social life, dude? Like, do you even do anything fun?
I have a girlfriend who I've been with for 5 years. So
that doesn't make any sense to me either, on multiple different levels. But
no, I'm generally curious. Why does that not make sense?
Well, for one, dating somebody for 5 years, that sounds disgusting. That sounds
wow. No, she's a great girl. She's like a life partner. I mean, I love that girl to death. I mean, we're best friends.
No. Dude, I'm sure you do. I'm talking about from my perspective.
I'm just messing around with you, Matt. I'm just messing around.
Listen, I can't. I've struggled to. You know, this is not my show. I couldn't imagine someone putting up with me for 5 years. Let's just say that. But
neither. That's what makes her such a great girl, because I'm a huge pain in the ass. Like that's the thing that makes her great. But no, like, yeah, I don't really have a social life per se, especially like the last 2 years trying to finish up my degree. Balancing school and football last semester was let's just put difficult, like working the hours that you have to work to be good at your craft and also passing classes. It's not exactly fun per se. But yeah, it was a lot of long weekends trying to get both things done.
Yeah, I bet. And while also my point was they're like also keeping up a relationship with somebody. It's a lot on your plate, man. I know the first thing I would have cut was the girl.
Oh, wow. No, see that. Yeah, that's my point. Is like, I when I told her this is what I wanted to do like 3 years ago, she was super supportive, and I think that's what's made it work. Is that she's unquestioningly had my back. So if you do have somebody in your life, whether it's a girlfriend, life partner, husband, wife, whatever it is, finding somebody that supports you unquestionably, like no matter what you do. No matter what dream you chase, that I think, if anything, it's helped me, because school and doing this football stuff is incredibly time consuming, and having somebody that kind of sticks by your side has been really cool for sure.
Yeah, I imagine so. I have not found that person who knows if
Matt,
I ever
you
will.
will. You will. You're a great guy, and you'll. Some girl will read your reception perception and be like, God, I never knew that about Devin Funchess. This is so perfect.
Oh no! If Devin Funchess ever is the reason that I meet a girl, I think she has to be the wrong one. No, but no, that's a good point and a good ending subject on my. We're not going to talk about my dating life, that's for sure. As I've said many times on many shows, but I think that Graham, you've made a lot of good points here. But I always give the guest one last shot at the floor before I rip it out from under you and we get out of here. So, any last shots at any parting words here? Go for it.
Sure. So, not to get too deep here or, kind of kill the vibe of the show, but
this is the podcast to get deep. So do what you need to.
About 5 years ago, I made a really poor choice that almost ended my life. And not to get into too specifics, I was 17. I made a really poor choice. It wasn't like a DUI or anything like that. So I didn't get in trouble with the law. But from that point on, about a year after that, I had no idea what I was doing. Like I really resonated with your piece, and not to give you another ego boost here, Matt. I was just like you, that I had to rebuild my foundation. Like I just had nothing there. And in general, I think this football community and fantasy Twitter and writing about football has given me a purpose in life that I really had no idea would. After that experience. And maybe one day I'll write about the specifics of what happened once I have enough strength to do so. But I think in general, when life is hard or something happens to you, no matter what you do, like don't put yourself in a box. Like don't think, oh, I have to be this one person. I have to think this one way. Because you're going to have experiences and hopefully you don't almost lose your life like I did. But I think having a perspective box and trying different things has gotten me at least to the point where I'm at 21, where I feel comfortable with myself again. And I think that's something I'm still evolving and learning as a human, and something that I am trying to get better at.
Yeah, well, I think we're all trying to get better as humans, but I mean, I definitely really resonate with everything you just said. And if you wanted to discuss more shit, we can. The podcast does not have to end right now, but I mean, I mean, I could personally say that, yeah, of course. Like, I mean, I've talked about it more, and I actually talked about, the end of season 1 on the little status update. I think the last episode of season 1, I'm going to actually have somebody interview me, and because people have asked to hear my bullshit, and when the people you got to give the people what they want. So, I mean, that was very similar to me. Like, it was obviously like my career is born out of trials and a tribulation in my personal life. And it can be a very powerful moment that like gives you clarity on what you want in the world, I think.
Yeah, it does. And like when you go through something like you've been through, or on a complete opposite spectrum that I've gone through, where you lose kind of everything and you kind of lose who you are, stripping down to bare bones was probably the most eye-opening, but also the most important moment of my life. Like I go back when I talk about it with like close personal friends or whatever, but like it was the best and worst moment of my life, because it kind of gave me clarity after time. It wasn't a day after it, but after time I had the I guess the forethought maybe to kind of make the most out of the situation and just rebuild who I am.
Yeah, that is the most important. It's definitely not like, it's not immediate. You don't like wake up one morning and be like, okay, I get it. Like I got it now, after this bad thing. Like you gotta roll around in the mud a little bit for a long time. That's a kind of crude way of describing it. But like I said, yeah, it can be the point in your life where you earn clarity, and you eventually settle on what it is. Well, Graham, I hope that someday you do write about that. I would love to read it. I know that I would read it. I obviously clearly I identify with like the human human interest pieces and everything like that. It's very fascinating. People are so interesting to me.
Yeah, we are. I mean, we are by far the most interesting subjects. Like I always, when I'm out or whatever, it's just fun to watch people interact. So you're right. Yeah. I think humans are what we can do is unfathomable, but the decisions that we make is also a pretty interesting subject as well.
Yeah, both on the good and bad side. Well, Graham, I really appreciate your time today. This has been great. I think that there's a lot that you can take away from what you said, and I think, like I mentioned to everybody at the top, if you want to look at an example in the industry of somebody that I think is doing things the right way and is eventually going to lead to great things, I think that Graham is a great example of that. So if you're out there and you're looking to get started, consider, taking some notes from the episode and making it through. And for all the listeners out there, of course, thank you guys as always for tuning in. It's my pleasure to give you something that you apparently like listening to. And if you can return the favor by sharing the podcast, rating and reviewing on iTunes, that is always encouraged. Like I mentioned up at the top, the status update of that this will be the first season of the podcast that will eventually close. Again, the interest in it is fantastic, and I hope that we continue to give you something that you like. So thank you so much for listening today, and I hope you learned something.